Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that.
January 2026. Bone-chilling cold descends upon Moscow's Red Square. Inside the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin paces the floors. 4 years. His so-called special military operation in Ukraine has now mutated into the longest war of his life. The epic struggle of the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany in World War II lasted 1,418 days. On January 11, 2026, the Ukraine war crossed that grim milestone. Top economists of the Western world had predicted that Russia's economy would collapse like a house of cards at the very beginning of the war, that Moscow would go bankrupt due to a lack of dollars. But has that actually happened? The shopping malls in Moscow are still crowded, the lights in restaurants are still burning, and on the front lines, Russian artillery continues to rain fire relentlessly. On the surface, everything seems normal. It is as if the monster named war has not even touched this country. But what story lies hidden behind this glamorous curtain? How is Russia's economy still surviving after tearing through the nets of thousands of sanctions? By what magic has Putin kept the wheels of his country turning? And in 2026, has that magic wand begun to crack? We will attempt to find the answers to these questions, dissecting the true state of the country 4 years into the war and revealing the news from the inner sanctum of Russia's economy in today's episode. At the start of the war, top Western think tanks and economists were fairly certain of one thing: Russia's economy would collapse within months of attacking Ukraine. Expulsion from SWIFT, frozen reserves, and the pressure of thousands of sanctions would bankrupt Moscow. But reality told a different story. Looking at the statistics of 2023 and 2024, anyone's eyes would widen in disbelief. In these 2 years, Russia's GDP growth was over 4%. While many powerful European nations were struggling with fears of recession, seeing such a booming economy in a warring nation led many to label it a miracle, or the Russian miracle. But dig a little deeper, and it becomes clear that this growth is not a sign of a healthy economy. Rather, it is a kind of mirage. Economists explain this state as a wartime sugar rush. Let's simplify the matter. Suppose you inject a massive amount of sugar or glucose into your body. This will give you a temporary burst of energy. You might be able to run faster than usual. But in the long run, this excess sugar will shut down your organs. Analysts say this is exactly what has happened to Russia's economy. To withstand the shock of 2022, the Kremlin began pouring money into the market like water. In 2024, Russia's federal expenditure jumped to 40.2 trillion rubles, about $502.5 billion, up from 32.35 trillion rubles in 2023. This massive amount of money was poured primarily into one sector, the military. Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov proudly stated that in the first 9 months of 2025, the manufacturing sector grew by 23%. Sounds great, doesn't it? But the lion's share of this production consists of tanks, missiles, artillery shells, and military equipment. In economic terms, this is called unproductive investment. When you build a school, hospital, or road, it keeps the wheels of the economy turning in the long term. But when you spend billions of dollars to build a missile or tank that is destroyed on the battlefields of Ukraine, that money is effectively incinerated. It increases numbers in the GDP ledger, true, but brings no prosperity to the lives of ordinary people. According to Richard Connolly of the Royal United Services Institute, the Putin administration has very cleverly rewired Russia's economy. They have placed the economy in a medically induced coma, so it does not feel the pain of external sanctions. The government is providing loans to military factories at low interest or subsidies through the Industrial Development Fund. Meanwhile, ordinary businessmen or civilian sector entrepreneurs have to take bank loans at high interest rates of 16 to 20%. As a result, Russia's economy has become lopsided. Military factories are bloating, while general businesses are gasping for air. But the shelf life of this sugar rush is running out. The side effects of this artificial stimulation began to appear in 2025. Economists are calling this the post-spending hangover. The tide of government spending is now receding. the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and Russia's own Academy of Sciences. All forecasts are now negative. They state that in 2025 and 2026, Russia's growth rate will drop to the range of just 0.6% to 1%. That is, the artificial balloon inflated at the start of the war has begun to leak. In 2026, Russia is entering an era of long-term stagnation, where growth will be nominal, but the internal structure of the economy will be shaky. But the question is, what game is Putin playing with the oil market to sustain this fragile economy? What flows through the arteries of Russia's economy is not blood, it is oil. The key to the Kremlin's power and the mantra for its survival is this black gold or crude oil. When the Western world imposed sanction after sanction on Russian oil at the start of the war, Vladimir Putin played an unprecedented move. He created a massive shadow fleet. Over 400 old, dilapidated tanker ships were bought and floated onto the oceans overnight. The ownership of these ships is unclear, their insurance is non-existent. Flying under the radar, these ships began smuggling Russian oil to countries like India, China, and Turkey. Interestingly, these ships were using flags of convenience from countries that would surprise many. Flying the flags of nations like Gabon, Liberia, East Timor, or Malawi, these ghost ships were tearing through the net of Western sanctions to sell oil. But since late 2025, the tables have started to turn. The Western world, especially the European Union and Britain, has taken a hard stance against this shadow fleet. The British military has now been granted legal authority to intercept and search suspicious vessels if they wish. The result is exactly what was expected. Russia's proud shadow fleet has now shrunk to half its previous capacity. To understand how desperate the situation has become, a recent example will clarify. More than 15 tanker ships stationed near the coast of Venezuela, which had been using flags of various anonymous countries, suddenly switched their flags to become Russian-flagged vessels in the last 2 weeks. According to Lloyd's List Intelligence, in December 2025, 18 ships hurriedly took shelter under the Russian flag solely to escape raids or seizure by Western forces at sea. This game of cat and mouse has directly impacted Moscow's pocket. Russia's revenue from oil has dropped dramatically by about 50% in the last year. Compared to July 2024, Russia's oil and gas revenue fell by nearly 27% in July 2025. There are 2 reasons for this. First, due to sanctions, Russia is forced to sell oil at a much lower price or huge discounts. Second, the fall in global oil prices. World Bank forecasts say that while the average price of Brent crude oil was $68 a barrel in 2025, it could drop further to $60 in 2026, which would be the lowest in the last 5 years. There is another major reason for the furrow on the Kremlin's forehead: Venezuela. After the removal of President Maduro, control of Venezuela's oil fields is effectively in Washington's hands. Venezuela holds the world's largest oil reserves. Analysts believe that if the Trump administration begins releasing millions of barrels of oil from Venezuelan fields into the global market, oil prices will hit rock bottom, and a drop in oil prices is a direct blow to Russia's ability to wage war. Because while oil and gas used to contribute 50% to Russia's budget, it has now dropped to 25%. The revenue target of 10.9 trillion rubles from oil and gas in the 2025 budget was not met. Income stalled at 8.7 trillion rubles. To cover this massive deficit, Russia is now forced to dip into its savings reserves, but those reserves are not infinite. Putin has funded the war so far with his shadow fleet and oil money, but in 2026, that very oil politics is becoming a noose around his neck. On one hand, a shrinking fleet, on the other, plummeting oil prices. Caught in this double crisis, the Kremlin's treasury is gasping. But the question is, if money doesn't come from selling oil, how will the war continue? Will Putin then reach into the pockets of the people, or will the ordinary Russian citizen burn in the fire of inflation? General economic principles suggest that a decrease in the unemployment rate is good news for a country. It means most people have jobs and the economy is vibrant. But in Russia's case, this principle has turned into a terrifying curse. By late 2025, Russia's unemployment rate dropped to just 2%. On the surface, this is an enviable statistic. But hidden behind this number is a deep demographic disaster. In Russia, there is no shortage of work. There is a shortage of people to do the work. Vladimir Putin's prolonged war has devoured a huge portion of Russia's able-bodied workforce. Hundreds of thousands of young men are fighting in the mud and snow of Ukrainian trenches. Some have lost their lives, others have returned crippled, and those who wanted to avoid the war have fled abroad. This exodus of educated youth from middle-class families has caused a massive brain drain in Russia. Looking at the statistics, the severity of this crisis becomes clear. About 3.8 million people are currently working in Russia's defense industrial base. In the last 3 years, 800,000 new workers have been hired in this sector alone. The government is pouring heaps of money into this sector, offering fat salaries to attract workers. This has created an unequal competition. While military factories are drawing away workers with high wages, civilian or general business establishments are struggling with a labor crisis. According to Russia's Higher School of Economics, by the end of 2024, the country faced a shortage of about 2.6 million workers. Russia does not have the manpower to fill this massive void. To retain workers, ordinary businessmen are also forced to increase salaries. But when wages rise without an increase in production, the result is exactly what is happening in Russia: inflation. People have money in their hands, but there are no goods in the market. As a result, prices are skyrocketing. Although sky-high inflation has been somewhat controlled since the start of the war, it is still above 6%, far higher than the central bank's 4% target. To pull the reins on this inflation, the Central Bank of Russia has taken a desperate step. They have hiked the interest rate to the 16 to 20% range. Think about it. You are an ordinary businessman. If you want to take a bank loan to expand your business, you have to pay 20% interest annually. It is impossible to make a profit in any healthy business model with such high interest. Consequently, exactly what you'd expect is happening. New investment has stopped. Businessmen are sitting on their hands. Russia's economy is now effectively split in two. On one side is the bloated military sector, where money is flowing like a fountain. On the other side is the gasping civilian sector. The situation is so fragile that due to lack of demand and pressure of loans, many large Russian civilian manufacturing companies are making their employees work only 4 days a week, and many are forced to lay off staff. Two different realities exist side by side in the same country. On one hand, missile factories are running 3 shifts day and night, while on the other, padlocks hang on factories making ordinary goods. Putin might be able to supply money by selling oil or breaking into reserves, but where will he import the people to work in the war zones or factories? Some soldiers or workers might be found from North Korea, but is that enough to keep the wheels of a massive economy like Russia turning? This manpower crisis is going to be the biggest weakness of Putin's long-term war. And to cover this weakness, the Kremlin is now resorting to a game of hide-and-seek with data. There was a time when Russia's Statistics Bureau, Rosstat, regularly published all detailed economic data. But since the attack on Ukraine in 2022, the Kremlin has slowly started closing the doors on information. It is said, "What you can't measure, you can't manage." But the Putin administration is now operating on the reverse policy. What cannot be seen, people do not question. 4 years into the war, in 2026, Russia has stopped publishing its trade deficit, foreign currency reserves, and even true population statistics. The severity of the matter is understood from a recent event. A report by Pромsvyazbank (PSB) revealed that Rosstat is no longer publishing real retail trade data adjusted for inflation. Why this secrecy? The reason is simple. Government figures show retail turnover has increased by 12.2%. Sounds great, right? But PSB analysts say if you subtract inflation or the increased price of goods from this, the real growth is only 2 to 3%. This state censorship of data is designed so that ordinary people or foreign investors cannot catch this statistical deception. But the problem is, you can hide data on paper, but you cannot hide the condition of people's pockets. To cover the costs of war, the Kremlin's treasury is now strained. In 2025, the revenue target from the Russian budget was 40.3 trillion rubles, but actual revenue was 36.6 trillion rubles. The main reason for this huge deficit is the drop in oil and gas revenue. Now the question is, If money doesn't come from selling oil, who will fund the war? The answer is cruel: the ordinary people of Russia. The government has now dipped into the savings of the people to cover the deficit. The axe of taxation has fallen. From January 1st, value-added tax or VAT in Russia has been increased from 20% to 22%. Not only that, small businessmen who were previously outside the scope of VAT are now being trapped in the VAT net. Previously, VAT was applicable if annual income was 60 million rubles. Now it has been lowered to 10 million rubles. The government is not stopping here. Plans have been made to impose new levies or duties on laptops, smartphones, and even light bulbs used to light homes. This is being called the post-spending hangover. For the last 2 years, the government spent lavishly on the war, and now ordinary people are paying the bill. Prices are rising, and on top of that, there is the burden of new taxes. But is people's income increasing? The answer is no. Rather, administrative fines have been increased in various sectors. In other words, the government is desperate to collect money by any means necessary. When the BBC's Steve Rosenberg asked ordinary Russians about their thoughts on 2026, a sad picture emerged. While the Kremlin is declaring 2025 as the year of Pobeda, or victory, ordinary people are uttering only one word: peace. How devastated people's mental state is due to economic uncertainty is understood when a citizen says, 5 years is a long way off. I don't even know what will happen in the next 10 days. People have stopped planning for the future, and when people stop thinking about the future and cut spending, the wheels of the economy slow down even further. The Kremlin may want to show the outside world through a smokescreen of data that Russia is invincible, but the silent cry echoing in every Russian kitchen, every grocery store, and every ordinary person's wallet cannot be covered by propaganda. When a state runs a war by cutting the pockets of its citizens instead of protecting them, what is the ultimate result of that war? Is Russia's economy heading toward long-term paralysis? Can Putin handle the challenges of 2026, or will this be the final nail in the coffin of his power? Or will Putin play the last trick in his magic bag and stun the world once again? Economists do not see 2026 as a year of dramatic collapse for Russia. Rather, they identify it with a more terrifying word: stagnation. According to analysts, Russia is passing the phase of managed cooling and falling directly into a pit of long-term stagnation. The forecast of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, is bound to rob the Kremlin bosses of their sleep. They say that in 2026, Russia's GDP growth rate will drop to just 1%, with some forecasts even mentioning 0.6%. That means the artificial momentum generated at the start of the war is now grinding to a halt. But how will the state run? The biggest weapon's hand, the National Wealth Fund, is running dry fast. To cover the budget deficit, the government is forced to spend money from this fund, even selling the state's accumulated gold. Many might think that once the war ends, business with Europe will restart and everything will be fine. But that hope is futile. A researcher from the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy has clearly stated that there is no possibility of restoring Russia's economic relations with the European Union within the next 10 years. This probability is effectively zero. Russia is now entirely dependent on Eastern countries to keep its economic wheels turning. China is buying oil, India is buying weapons, and North Korea is sending men and ammunition. But this equation of new friendship is not very comfortable either. If Donald Trump's new tariff policy causes cracks in the unity of BRICS nations, Russia's last refuge could collapse like a house of cards. Leaders like Lula da Silva are indeed banding together against Trump's unilateral policies, but Russia's economy is now so fragile that it lacks the capacity to withstand even minor international shocks. Still, Vladimir Putin is not one to give up just yet. It is estimated that with the reserves still left in his hands, he can continue this war for at least another 18 months to 2 years. His strategy is named the long game. Putin has bet on time. He believes that political instability in the Western world, election equations, and fatigue in providing aid to Ukraine will eventually hand him the win. He thinks the West will eventually give up, but Russia will hold its ground. This asymmetry, or unequal battle of patience, is now Moscow's main strategy. 2026 may not be the year of Russia's fall, but it will be a year of agonizing and slow decay. A year where ordinary people will become increasingly poor, the state will sacrifice its last savings into the fire of war, and black clouds of uncertainty will thicken over Moscow's sky. If the Western world can tighten its net of sanctions further, especially increasing pressure on the shadow fleet and the banking sector, the consequences of this gamble by Putin could be dire. The war will stop one day, but how many decades it will take Russia to stand up from this economic rubble? That is now the biggest question.